March 1st, 1989. Families flood into a mall meant to outshine every shopping center in Ohio, a 1.5 million square foot palace built for luxury on blue-collar ground. Marble floors gleam, carousel music spins, restaurants buzz. Yet behind gilded doors, 2/3 of storefronts sit empty, an unmissable warning hidden in plain sight. Forest Fair Mall was a $250 million risk, opening with celebration but already rotting from the inside. How does a place designed as Cincinnati's crowning retail jewel collapse before it ever truly lived? The answer traces ambition's tipping point and the price of building dreams that no one can afford. In 1985, a stretch of farmland at the edge of Cincinnati caught the eye of George Herskew. Where others saw cornfields and tangled brush, he pictured something monumental, an American palace of commerce. The land, 100 acres wedged between Forest Park and Fairfield, was already under consideration for a simple Biggs hypermarket. But Herskew, an Australian developer with a gambler's instinct, thought bigger. The suburbs north of Cincinnati buzzed with new homes and families, factories still humming, and the promise of growth in every direction. Herskew imagined not just another shopping center, but a destination, one that would draw crowds from across Ohio and beyond. A super mall on a scale the region had never seen. He made his move, securing the land at the intersection of Interstate 275 and Winton Road. The initial plans called for something modest, but Herskew's vision quickly eclipsed that. The numbers ballooned, from a single anchor and a handful of stores to a blueprint for 1.9 million square feet of retail, 5 department store anchors, and space for 200 specialty shops. The ambition was staggering. Most malls in Cincinnati topped out at half that size. Forest Fair would be different. Longer corridors, higher ceilings, more light streaming through skylights, and amenities that bordered on the extravagant. Developers and city officials gathered around glossy renderings, tracing their fingers along the outline of a project that promised to transform the entire corridor. The site, with its easy access to the interstate and vast parking fields, seemed to offer limitless potential. Herskew spoke of marble floors, soaring atriums, and a retail mix that would rival the best of New York or Dallas. The pitch was infectious. L.J. Hooker, Herskew's company, committed to the project and poured resources into land acquisition and design. The idea was simple but bold. Cincinnati would get a mall worthy of the nation's largest cities, one that would put the region on the retail map. Every detail reflected confidence. The corridors would stretch nearly 1,800 feet, longer than 5 football fields end to end. The site plan reserved 6,000 parking spaces, enough to swallow the weekend traffic of any ordinary mall. Herskew believed that if he built something extraordinary, shoppers would come, no matter what the market studies said. In those early days, the optimism was irresistible. The land was cleared, the first stakes hammered into the soil, and the promise of Forest Fair Mall began to take shape, an audacious leap from empty acreage to a $250 million dream. By 1987, the stakes for Forest Fair Mall had grown far beyond bold architecture and big promises. L.J. Hooker, led by George Herskew, faced a wall of skepticism from the very retailers he needed. Bonwit Teller, B. Altman, Sakowitz, names that conjured Fifth Avenue and Houston Galleria, wanted no part of a mall surrounded by blue-collar neighborhoods. Demographic reports warned of low household incomes. Existing malls locked up the region's loyalties, and luxury anchors saw little reason to gamble on Cincinnati's northwest edge. But Herskew refused to take no for an answer. Instead of courting these brands, he bought them. L.J. Hooker acquired controlling interests in Bonwit Teller, B. Altman, and Sakowitz outright. Ownership, not partnership. These weren't just anchor tenants. They became subsidiaries, compelled to open their next flagship stores in a market that had never asked for them. It was a maneuver as audacious as it was risky, locking the mall's identity into a luxury tier that the local economy could not support. With anchors secured by force of acquisition, construction pressed forward. The original $200 million budget quickly unraveled. Change orders stacked up, marble for the floors, brass fixtures, custom woodwork, and a sprawling entertainment wing. Skylights stretched overhead, 2 food courts took shape, and the carousel was craned in before the roof was even finished. The cost surged to $250 million. Each decision, each upgrade, was justified as essential to the vision. Forest Fair would be a destination, not just a place to shop. But every dollar spent was borrowed. The project's debt mounted, not just for the mall, but for Hooker's global operations, which now carried $1.7 billion in obligations. Delays crept in. Higbee's, an early anchor, withdrew, forcing a scramble to relocate B. Altman and reconfigure the West Wing. Construction crews worked overtime, but the schedule slipped. By July 1988, the East Wing opened. Big's hypermarket and 20 shops greeted curious crowds, yet half the mall remained behind temporary walls, unfinished, dark, and silent. The luxury anchors, still months from opening, watched as shoppers drifted past empty storefronts. The vision was grand, but the reality already felt precarious. The gamble was set in concrete and steel. Hooker's executives had locked in a high-end identity, betting that spectacle could override market logic. The mall's future now depended on drawing crowds who had never shopped at Bonwit Teller, filling corridors with tenants who could pay premium rents, and servicing a debt load that demanded near-perfect performance. Even before the grand opening, the numbers told a story of ambition outpacing demand and a dream built on borrowed time. March 1st, 1989. By sunrise, a line of headlights snaked off Interstate 275, pouring into a sea of 6,000 parking spaces. The air buzzed with anticipation as families, teenagers, and retirees spilled out, drawn by the promise of something Cincinnati had never seen. The entrance gleamed under sharp spring light. Inside, the first steps landed on polished marble, the echo rippling through a corridor that seemed to stretch forever, 1,740 feet, longer than 5 football fields. Bonwit Teller's marble and brass caught the eye immediately, a slice of New York set down in Ohio. B. Altman's windows glowed with displays more at home on Fifth Avenue than in the Midwest. Parisian's awnings promised southern elegance. Sakowitz, flown in from Texas, radiated oil boom confidence. Elder Bierman anchored the far end, solid and familiar, a nod to local tradition. Every detail, from the gold leaf trim to the sculpted fountains, whispered luxury. Crowds pressed forward, some clutching commemorative crystal carousel horses handed out at the door. Carousel music drifted down the main concourse, mixing with laughter and the distant ring of arcade games. Children tugged parents toward the timeout entertainment wing, where the promise of mini-golf and Pac-Man waited. Wallaby Bob's brewery sent out the scent of hops and roasting malt. The Koala Clubhouse, first of its kind, checked in toddlers and handed parents pagers, a modern solution for a new kind of shopping trip. The spectacle was undeniable. News cameras panned across the atrium as Phyllis Diller cracked jokes at the Sakowitz ribbon cutting. Shoppers marveled at the skylights and the sheer size of it all. From above, the crowds looked impressive, filling the marble corridors and food courts. On paper, this was a triumph. But behind the dazzle, brown butcher paper covered 2 out of every 3 storefronts. Signs promised coming soon in looping script, but the spaces behind them were empty, silent, unfinished. Of 200 planned specialty shops, barely a third were open. The corridor's length, so impressive at first, only magnified the gaps. The walk from one anchor to the next passed stretches of silence. Some families peered into the darkened windows, puzzled. Others hurried past, drawn by the noise and light at the center. The parking lot, designed for a retail stampede, filled only to half its capacity by afternoon. Traffic jams at the entrance faded quickly. Local shopkeepers from Forest Park and Fairfield watched the spectacle with a mix of awe and skepticism, quietly noting the mismatch between marble floors and blue-collar paychecks. The grand debut delivered spectacle, but the hollowness lingered just beneath the surface. The anchors stood as monuments, but much of the mall was still a promise rather than a reality. For those who looked closely, the dream already showed its seams. Jennifer's first day at the Limited started with a paper hat, a name tag, and the smell of new cotton. She folded shirts for $5 an hour, her hands stiff by closing time. That first paycheck, $84 and change, went straight into a checking account her father helped her open. She learned to smile at customers who left piles in the fitting rooms, learned to count change, learned the small pride of a job that wasn't just a summer chore. Across the corridor, Michael waited by the fountain, a velvet box hidden in his jacket pocket. On a Tuesday in October, with barely a dozen people in the mall, he knelt on the tile floor and asked his girlfriend to marry him. The answer came with a shaky laugh and a kiss, the kind that draws applause from strangers. For them, the mall was more than marble and brass. It was the backdrop for a story they would tell for years. Sunday afternoons, the Hendersons arrived after church. Mrs. Henderson favored the long walk from Biggs to the carousel, pausing to watch the fountain's colored lights shimmer against the water. Her husband wandered the aisles of the hypermarket, never buying much, but always returning with a coffee. They rarely shopped for anything beyond groceries, but the routine mattered. It was a place to watch the world, to feel part of something bigger than their own quiet house. Teenagers clustered at the arcade, sometimes with quarters, sometimes just for the air conditioning and the sense of freedom. The Koala Clubhouse stayed busy, parents signing in their children for a few hours of supervised play so they could shop or just walk without tantrums or tugging hands. By 6 in the morning, the corridors echoed with the steady rhythm of sneakers, mall walkers tracing half-mile laps under the skylights. Maintenance crews worked in the shadows, scrubbing the fountain, polishing brass, checking escalators step by step. The hum of HVAC kept 1.5 million square feet at a perfect 72 degrees, no matter the weather outside. Every 2 hours, bathrooms were cleaned, trash bins emptied, food court floors mopped. The public face of Forest Fair Mall depended on an army behind the scenes. Janitors, electricians, security guards, all clocking in before the first shoppers arrived. Payroll slips stacked up, each hour adding to a monthly overhead that reached $1.2 million. On the busiest weekends, the food court filled with the scent of Sparrow pizza and cinnamon pretzels, but even then, empty tables stood at the edges. The carousel spun, children's laughter rising above the calliope music, while in the back offices, managers studied spreadsheets and worried about the numbers. Every storefront that stayed dark meant lost rent. Every empty corridor a warning. The mall felt alive, even vibrant. But the math was unforgiving. The memories being made, the first jobs, the proposals, the Sunday rituals, couldn't cover the bills. Forest Fair Mall was a machine built to run at full capacity, and every month below that line strained the gears a little more. In June 1989, Forest Fair Mall quietly went up for sale. The asking price, $200 million, already trailed the $250 million poured into its marble floors and empty corridors. No buyers came forward. 3 months later, the collapse became official. L.J. Hooker, burdened by $1.7 billion in global debt, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The mall had been open just 6 months. Control shifted to a consortium of 7 banks, led by the Bank of Nova Scotia, which had financed the original construction loans. Ownership on paper changed, but the mall's problems only deepened. The shockwaves reached the anchors almost immediately. B. Altman, one of the luxury flagships forced into the project by Hooker's acquisition, filed for bankruptcy in November 1989. Its store at Forest Fair lasted barely a year before liquidation. Bonwit Teller, another high-end anchor, closed in October 1990, 18 months after opening. Sakowitz, the Houston-based department store, exited soon after. By the end of 1990, 3 of the 5 original anchors were gone, leaving only Parisian and Elder Beerman alongside the Biggs hypermarket. The loss of these anchors unraveled the mall's retail mix and sent a clear signal to smaller tenants. Stability was gone. By 1991, occupancy had plunged to 56%. Empty storefronts multiplied, and the echo of foot traffic grew fainter. The mall's debt obligations remained fixed, but the revenue base shrank with each closure. The banks, now reluctant landlords, faced a property bleeding cash with no easy remedy. Forest Fair Mall had become a cautionary tale. Its downfall measured not just in lost tenants, but in the relentless arithmetic of debt and vacancy. August 2022 brought a decision that would end what decades of vacancy and failed reinvention could not. Forest Park's City Council gathered for a public vote, no longer debating whether the mall could be saved, but how soon it should come down. The tally was clear, all 7 members in favor. Official records cited economic blight, safety hazards, and the promise of new jobs from redevelopment. The debate was brief, the motion unanimous. There would be no more waiting for a miracle tenant, no more proposals for indoor soccer or flea markets. Demolition permits were issued within weeks. By March 2024, excavators rolled across the cracked asphalt where 6,000 cars once parked bumper to bumper. The eastern wing, the old Biggs and Cinema, was first to fall. Summer brought down the central corridors, the carousel platform, the food courts where teenagers once lingered over Orange Julius. By autumn, the western anchors stood alone, their facades stripped of logos, windows shattered by wind and time. Each phase erased another layer, until by December 2025, the entire 1.5 million square feet lay flattened, reduced to rubble and rebar. Dust clouds drifted over Interstate 275, visible for miles. The numbers told a story of loss that went beyond nostalgia. The mall, built at a cost of $250 million, had changed hands for just $18 million in 1996, a figure that barely covered the price of the land beneath it. No other Cincinnati project had fallen so fast. Where marble once gleamed and fountains danced, the ground now waited, empty and silent, for whatever came next. The dream that began with marble and ambition ended in the indifferent churn of demolition crews, the past swept away to make room for a future no one could quite picture. Across America, over 300 malls face demolition or decay, each echoing Forest Fair's lesson. Vision alone cannot conjure community or prosperity. As cities debate the fate of empty giants, the true cost isn't measured in dollars, but in the loss of shared spaces. When ambition outpaces reality, what remains is emptiness, both physical and civic. What do you think fills that void now? Share your thoughts below.